Hi, everybody. My name is Alyssa Malaspina, and I am here tonight with John, and I never can say your last name right, so please say it for me.
Kraska, like Alaska, Nebraska.
Kraska. Ah, I have a friend that's name is Traska, and it's spelled almost the same way.
Long lost relative.
I know, probably. And so we are here tonight. I'm the SD Librarian President, and I'm here with John from Every Library, and we have this amazing webinar series that we are starting tonight, which I'm so excited about. It's a start of a series on advocacy and learning how to advocate for yourself and learning how school librarians can do this. The first one tonight is all about funding, which is something we all need because school libraries never have enough funding, and learning sort of how to do that. And John is going to lead us in it, and I am so excited to get started. Oh, just a little reminder, if you have any questions, we'll be taking questions at the end, and we'll be taking it via the Twitter account. I'll be monitoring the Twitter account, so we're using the hashtag ISTLib. John has a slide in a second to tell you about that, but the hashtag is ISTLib if you want to ask any questions. So, John, it's your turn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alyssa. I really appreciate it. I just want to make sure that we're good. We got my screen?
We are good. We can see your screen.
Lovely. Thanks, folks. I'm going to spend about 50 minutes and then want to be able to take questions like Alyssa said, and to talk about the experience that we have as Every Library doing work at a school and district level, also at a public library level, about how do we talk. How do we have a conversation? How do we come against a set of ideas? Sometimes it's coming against us. This webinar is a collaboration between the SD Librarians Network and Every Library. It's a real thrill for us, and as Alyssa said, it's our first one. There will be 4 more, and at the end of the session tonight, we'll be talking about what we're going to be doing in April. And we would like to be able to get some feedback from you on, is the topic interesting? Is it germane? Is it relevant? And did you learn anything as well? So you can talk about it with the hashtag. Likewise, we're going to be monitoring throughout the conversation tonight. And over the long tail, too, the @ISTLib and the @EveryLibrary using the hashtag ISTLib for questions, comments, concerns, etc. So let me dive into it. Those of you who know Every Library, stay with me for a minute, but this might be updated for you. Those of you who don't, we're a national political action committee for libraries. We're not set up in the same way that other organizations are in the library advocacy ecosystem. We're set up as a 501c4, which is a very important distinction between a 501c3, which is pretty much everybody else. It's your ALAs, your ASLs, your ISTs, your ILA, the Illinois Library Association where I'm from, or ISLMA, the Illinois School Library Media Association, where we've got some good colleagues. We're set up as a C4 in order to work on politics. We are technically a super PAC for libraries. So if you listen to NPR, you watch Fox News, you know how super PACs can raise and expend unlimited funds to advance their nefarious special interests. Congratulations, folks. You are a nefarious special interest of this super PAC for libraries. We've worked on 74 public library campaigns since we got started. The funding that we have is not unlimited, though. We have worked on all of these campaigns pro bono, which is a very important thing to talk about. We do all of our work for free for the public library communities, for the school library communities that we work with, and yet our funding comes from individual donors, folks around the country who believe in what we're doing as a nationwide political action committee for libraries, who donate about $48.50 a year on average per person, and from the vendor community within the library world, like Rosen Publishing, like Follett, like Mango and EBSCO and DEMCO, organizations that care very much about what we're doing and are supporting that activity as a donor. One of the key areas of school library work that we started to do back at the beginning of 2016 was to work with school library associations around the country, state by state, on the ESSA plans. The Every Student Succeeds Act, of course, which was the successor to the No Child Left Behind, had a new opportunities in it for how school librarians can do their work and how school library programs can be, well, the largest classroom in the school in a much more effective way. So we did spend a lot of time working with folks as 2016 went along Now, many of the gains that we saw realized were from direct activity on the part of the school librarian communities in those individual states, attending meetings and talking about policy in a way that was certainly one level up from elevator speeches and talking points. And yet, one of the key things about all of that ESSA success around the country was a lot of it's gotten rolled back. A lot of it's gotten rolled back when it comes to how the Congress is working and the Department of Ed is working. So we wanted to double down. We started on our action.everylibrary.org site, working with school librarians, I should say, around the country when there were different challenges to either their budgets for their programs or even their own jobs. Being a political action committee for libraries, we're able to do much more around individual employment issues, not from a in the weeds, you're having a fight with your supervisor, but let's save the position. So we set up SaveSchoolLibrarians.org with the help from Follett this past summer. SaveSchoolLibrarians.org. Follett came in to help us build out a site that would be digital advocacy. And yeah, I'm doing a little bit of a commercial right now because I want you all to use it if you need it, because we're able to do digital advocacy at the school and district level to engage with folks in a town, in a school district area about, well, let's save the librarian's position if it's going to get cut. Let's fix the funding problem if it's going to get cut. A lot of the work that we do is reactive, and we want to move from just being reactive to being proactive. And some of what we want to explore today in this conversation with the SD Librarians Network is, how do you shift from? How do you prepare? Well, maybe with one eye on the crisis, but one eye on opportunity as well. What new funding do you need? That's my big question for you today. My big question for you today, what new funding do you need? Because I would like to be able to help you address that conversation. I don't know what you need. I don't know what you need personally, but put it in your head for me, because I want to take you through how people will listen to you talk about your funding. Not how to tell a better story. You're probably already an excellent storyteller. How do people listen to your stories, though? I want to help you think through that a little bit, help you understand from a data perspective around voters and around constituents and around both libraries in general, public libraries in particular, and also how people talk and think, feel, how they value the school community in regard to taxes. We have well, it's very true how storytelling affects the human brain. There are some very psychoactive things that happen when folks listen to a story. There are little like dopamine receptors that click off where you like have emotionally charged events, and your brain's like, oh yeah, I want more of that. That was a cool story. You've got mirroring that happens in the brain where you have, well, you can call it empathy. And some people have more of a well of empathy than others do. I know that for sure when I'm telling stories. You have a process that is almost, well, it's not logical, it's emotional. You have a process that is not higher order functioning. It's pretty basic for how the brain is wired. And message delivered to stories can be up to 22 times more memorable than just the facts. I just gave you a fact about that. You won't remember the 22 times. We tend to tell the wrong kind of stories. We tend to tell the wrong kind of stories in our library advocacy because we tend to look at the numbers, which we are responsible for, as being the story that people want to listen to. The numbers that we're responsible for, the number of kids who come in, the number of items that are checked out, the number of moments of hours of contact time, the ages and stages that you work with that you have to report on, and unfortunately, well, numbers do tell a story for a certain type of people. And I don't want to lose sight of that. There's a lot of conventional wisdom that says never tell stories with numbers, and that's not why I bring it up. I actually bring it up in order to try and do a little bit of a deeper dive about people who listen to numbers, who want to hear from you about numbers. Also, well, in your classic baseball, hockey, football, lacrosse kind of way, they would like to actually hear about, well, what's the heart of the player? What's the heart of the team? Who dug in and did that extraordinary thing on the field of play? How did Wayne Gretzky captain the team to victory? And yeah, what were the stats? Tell me about the box scores. I want to come back to this metaphor of the team and of the individual player, because there's a lot of story to be told that says, yeah, our earned run average, our homework percentage, our graduation rate, and yet here's the heart of the team, and not just, well, the librarian team is the one I want to really be talking about. Whether you're an individual single librarian at a single school or you're at a district with dozens of colleagues. I do this all the time incorrectly at every library. And in fact, I started the conversation with statistics about having 74 wins and having $250 million in successes and 18 school library communities and dozens of, no. We're out to build voter support for libraries, and here's why. Because we're not talking to voters about the funding formula for public libraries, and not talking to voters about the funding formula for school libraries, then who's going to defend them? That we have a vision that any library funding issue anywhere should matter to every library everywhere. That's why we chose the name Every Library. That approach about what is our values system is much more psychoactive. Because then I could talk about how we helped in communities as diverse as New Orleans and Dallas and Darby, Montana and River East, Illinois campaign and succeed at the public library election day. How we helped communities, individual librarians who were on the ropes. Let me tell you more about how people listen instead of what stories to tell. Let me tell you about how people listen about taxes and about libraries and about librarianship. Some of this is going to be in the public library side. We've got things to learn from our colleagues, and some of it's going to be about schools in particular, and they have a lot to learn from us as well. The single biggest takeaway from everything that we know about the public perception, the voter perception of libraries and librarianship is that their willingness to support increased funding for the library in a public library context, a school library context, is not driven by or limited by their use of the library. Let me make sure that hits. Their voters' willingness to support increased library funding is not limited or driven by their use of the library. Of course, that's true for schools, but that also means that they are not necessarily the immediate stakeholders as parents. There's a lot of folks out there who would like to see proper funding flow to the library in a public and in a school context, who have not been there since they themselves were children and who do not even have children in your school. The country is littered with library buildings named after families that are too rich to use the place and they want to see it on the corner. The school has book plates after book plates after book plates and donor boxes after donor boxes after donor boxes from people who have no personal stake. They might have some nostalgia. But their user status doesn't matter, which means that you really cannot talk. Their stakeholder status doesn't matter, so you cannot really talk about what's in it for them or their kids. You've got to talk about it in a way, well, that's what's in it for those kids. And those kids are somebody else. Those kids, those people, well, that could be a negative if we don't have that well of empathy. Or it could be a very positive situation. But how are they listening? They're listening in one of two ways. Of course, if the user status doesn't matter, the stakeholder status doesn't matter, there are two distinct groups of humans, though. There's stakeholders and there's non-stakeholders. There's users and there's non-users if you're in the public side. To the stakeholder, to the parent, to the invested stakeholder in the future of the way things go at your school or across your district, you start your conversation about your library services with the phrase, as you know. They want to listen as a member of the tribe. They want to listen as an insider. They want to listen, well, even if they don't know, because you're helping them come up to date. As you know, we are the largest classroom in the school. As you know, we are the only place before school and after school that certain services happen for those kids. Our kids. You're a stakeholder. As you know, we are underfunded, improperly funded, inadequately funded, not quite funded quite yet in the right way, or staffed, or collected, or programmed. As you know, we're the only place in school that can do this work, both curriculum support and out of classroom time. As you might know, we need a new funding approach. To the non-user, to the non-stakeholder, to the person who hasn't been there and has nobody in their immediate lives in your largest classroom, you start the conversation with the phrase, as you can imagine. Because they are capable of imagining it. They're capable of it. If they've got a well of empathy, they actually would like to get updated about what's going on over there because they haven't been there since they were kids themselves. They don't really have a point of reference that's anything current. As you can imagine, we're the largest classroom in the school. As you can imagine, before school and after school, we're the only part of the school. Before and after the school day, we're the only part of this community that does X or Y or Z for those kids. As you can imagine, We are shovel ready to work both in the classroom and outside of the classroom on curriculum support, independent learning. You tell me, folks. As you can imagine, without the resources that come from a properly allocated budget, we cannot. They want to listen to you in a way that sparks something from them. The stats matter, sure, and the stories are deep, but to respect them first and foremost as either a stakeholder or not is to open a door to them that they know that you're not just talking about talking points. This isn't some elevator speech. This is the truth of what you need. And that breaks through to that part of the brain that we're looking to activate. There's 4 kinds of stories that we need to tell, and we often only tell the first one. In fact, we're often coached to only tell the first kind, which are personal stories or organizational stories that about our successes that emphasize our values. And that's very important. To help so-and-so kid, to help such and such a population, to do something that's extraordinary with a limited amount of resources is virtuous, and yet we also, when we're talking about money, we're talking about funding, when we're talking about your budget, need to talk about personal and organizational stories of failure that demonstrate integrity. It might not be that you lost the kid, I hope not, God help you, but that we were unable. We were not unwilling, we were unable, without the resources that come from this funding request, to do what we were hoping to do. Yes, we tell stories about other people who are important to us. We tend to tell too many of those stories. We never, well, not never, that's a little bit expansive, but we tell an awful lot of stories about our kids. In public library settings, we tell an awful lot of stories about patrons. But do we actually start the personal narrative that emphasizes our values or demonstrates our integrity, either through success or failure, with the pronoun I or we? We might talk about him or her, or he and she, or them and they. But do we say I need this or we need that? The idea that there's an abstract, largest classroom in the school that's floating somewhere 6 feet above the floor that has an abstract, independent agency. No, let's talk about why you do what you do. It breaks through. People want to listen in that way. And to emphasize your values is to talk about how funding supports the extent, supports it in a new way. To demonstrate your integrity about failures and shortfalls is to say how we can correct it. Okay, back to more data about how people listen about libraries and librarians. About 37% of voters in an average-sized community want to see the librarians and the library, whether in a public setting or other settings, have the resources you need to succeed. And it's not just the library, it's the librarians too. 37% would definitely vote yes for the library. These numbers are different for school district measures, I'll give you that. But 37% of the American voting public would definitely vote yes for a library if we talked about it, which means that they would stand with you as a constituent in front of your school board, that they would be one of those folks who would donate in a particular way to fund that particular program. There's another 37% who may vote yes for a library measure. They may vote yes, not because they don't believe in the library like those top 37% do. They don't believe in the librarians. It's not even, it's kind of like you're not even a big issue to them. They have a question about taxes before they're going to vote yes for anything. The 37% who may vote yes for the library are not going to be persuaded by huge stories about, well, I'm sorry, a huge belief system about libraries, but they do have a value system, personally, that is concerned about other people. And they don't understand today, from the public library side, how much of that value system, well, resonates and translates and is being done by the library. They have a value system about the future of education in their town, in your state, across the country, that they don't necessarily understand because they might not have a current experience of school librarianship to reference. They would like to know what you're going to do with the money and who's going to spend it. What you're going to do with the money is not just the features. We talk about features all the time. It's the value system. That you want to help special pops. You want to help before and after school. You want to help the classroom, the students' curriculum supports that you bring in with a database. My goodness, they're eager to find out, and they want to know about it from you as opposed to from some other place. They don't have questions about the library until you give them the vocabulary to have questions about the library. They got a question about spending. And the library's legitimate request for new funding, the school library program's legitimate request, might get lumped into what everybody else has ever done wrong in the school district or in your school. So for us to break through is to change the noun that we're talking about from school and kids to school library and I. We need this to help those kids. There is another 26% of the American voting public who will never vote for nothing, and I'm not really worried about them. I would like to concentrate on the 37% who believe and the 37% who have questions. I'd like to concentrate also on how people believe about new school taxes. This data set, unlike the earlier data set, which came from OCLC, this data set is from the Phi Delta Kappa poll of public attitudes towards public schools. This is the 48th annual, which I think was 2016. Would you support or oppose raising local property taxes to try and improve the public schools in your community? Do you feel that way strongly or somewhat? And if there's folks watching tonight and watching on the archive who are not in public schools and they're in private schools and all that, that's cool. We're talking about taxes, though, because that makes Americans crazy. 53% net strongly support. 45% net strongly or truly oppose raising local property taxes. And there's a softness to all of this. There is a blur here between, well, 37% of the American voting public will vote yes for a library, 37% have questions, 74%, we're even softer. What breaks through? I'm going to come back around to what breaks through in just a second. If your taxes are raised in your local community and try and improve your local public schools, what's the number one thing that your money should be spent on? I'm not trying to map your request. I'm trying to give you some insights into how people listen. 34% want to hear more about teachers. 6% want more learning specialists and counselors. Your need, your legitimate need, falls somewhere in between here. Your legitimate need isn't even on these big surveys. And yet, what are you trying to accomplish? And how are they listening to you? Yeah, if there's a disposition towards listening about teachers, the role of the school librarian as an instructional support provider, great. If there's a disposition in your community towards people listening about learning specialists and counselors, great. What do you do with individualized learning? What do you do if it's simply the idea of building out better infrastructure to support all right, we get back to the approach that believers have when they listen to you about the library, the school library, and librarianship. You're not perceived as just the practical, as a provider of just the practical. Let me go back one slide, because this is really practical. This is rather practical, except for the teacher side of it, but that's kind of a feature. Like, people don't know exactly how many kids are in class and what teachers actually do, and people sure don't know what your door count is every day. And they really are not necessarily concerned with the practical. The library is not perceived by the believers as just a provider of practical answers and information. The most committed supporters hold a belief that the library is a transformational force. Those users, those stakeholders, might have a story like that themselves about their school library or a librarian in their lives. I want you to dig into that. I want you to update their nostalgia about what you're doing right now for kids in your largest classroom in the school. I want you to understand that the believer is listening in a way that is based on belief and not based on the practical, not based on the features. And that you can use language around belief and around values and around hope. The questioners in your community are looking for, well, answers to their questions. The questioners, whether it's that soft part of strongly oppose or strongly support, or sorry, oppose or support new taxes for schools, or if it's the 37% who've got questions about public libraries. The factors that determine a resident's willingness to increase their own taxes to support libraries are their perceptions and attitudes about the library and the librarian. What we have to do when we answer the question for the questioning voter, before they even articulate it, is to answer the question, well, They've got two big questions. They got two big questions every single time the the school board sits down together. They got two big questions every time city council meets. They got two big questions every time there's a vote. Where's my money going and who's spending my money? We tend to use the word library or school library in our advocacy exclusively. And I said before about that school library abstractly floating 6 feet above the floor someplace, some idealized platonic school library. No, folks, we got to talk about the librarians, because the questioners are influenced by their perceptions and attitudes, not just about the largest classroom in the school, but about who works there. And if their perception is, well, if they're stakeholders and they're one of those PTA parents and they cruise by every day at 2:15 p.m. and they see the place is full, they think everything's fine. Well, we have to update their perception. If their perception is based in something from 1973, 1983, even 2013, it's on us to talk about what you do, because they're willing to listen. They're willing to have their answers, or they're willing to have their questions answered. They're not stone cold at you. They're not any tax is a bad tax. They, the voters, recognize the value of a passionate librarian as a true advocate for lifelong learning. This is a data point about public libraries, but I think it translates very nicely into schools too, because once folks get a chance to understand how you are at a point of contact with the kids in a way that nobody else, maybe counselors, definitely an admin, maybe gym, maybe band, maybe arts and theater, but really any classroom environment, you have access and contact time with every kid. And the passion that you bring to that access and contact time with every kid is a key driver for people to identify with you. And identify when you tell them honestly and truthfully what you need as being a legitimate request. What delegitimizes a request in the eyes of somebody who's looking for a passionate librarian is statistics and numbers. Here's why. What activates voters for libraries? This is on the public library side. Well, there's a couple of things that activate people to vote on a given election day. First and foremost, though, is do they vote? Are they voters? Do they have a culture, tradition, or habit of voting? Do they like to vote? Do they go and vote all the time? If you're in the Pacific Northwest, do they get their mail-in ballot and return it the same day? If you're one of those people, you are perfect, because you will vote again. And it's on us to knock on your door and tell you what's on the ballot, because otherwise you're going to vote based on whether you're a believer about libraries, a questioner who may or may not have had their answers, or somebody who just doesn't believe in taxes. And I want to get to the questioners. All right. The other big driver is whether you've had a personal contact with the candidate or the issue on the ballot. And this behavioral stuff is very important, because the personal contact with the candidate or the issue might not necessarily come in person. It might come in a simulacrum of personal, like a social media or commercial advertising. But if it does come in a way that's human to human and authentic, not inauthentic, forgive me if I slurred that, it is authentic, person-to-person contact. It's one of the biggest things that you can get. Hi, I'm John. I'm running for mayor. Let me tell you about what I believe about our town. Hi, I'm John. I'm running for school board. Let me tell you about how I'm going to support those kids. Hi, I'm John. I'm with the mayor's campaign. Let me tell you about my person, what she or he believes, and why I'm voting that way. It works also, folks, for advocacy in that traditional, in quotes, kind of way, that you don't have to have, well, it's important, of course, that when you're doing advocacy work that you have easy access to advocacy tools. It's like in the other list about the weather. It's like digital blizzards. If you can't actually advocate, if the website stinks, if you can't figure out what to write, if you don't know what to do because they haven't made it one-click easy for you. But the two biggest things that drive somebody to become an advocate for any issue is if they've been an advocate before, if they love to advocate. It might have been about a school library, but maybe not. It might have been about some other big issue in education. It might have been on some other small issue in the community that was big to them. If they've had a prior success, and I don't mean even winning the issue, I mean just like of being an advocate. So we've successfully advocated. We didn't win that time. That's cool. We won that time. That's awesome. To find those people. Well, The other part of it is, has the human being that wants to be an advocate had an experience of the cause? And it's akin to having an experience of the candidate. Now, you don't have to get into the dinghy yourself to go out and paddle out to the ship to go save the whales for Greenpeace in order to donate to Greenpeace. You don't have to have a personal experience of it, but you got to hear about it first person singular from somebody who's doing it. That's why we market. That's why we advertise. That's why we go door to door to say, hi, I'm John. I'm with Save the Whales. Here's how we're saving whales. Do you believe in whales? Awesome. Then how about you donate? How about you help support our cause? Let me tell you about the time I saved the whales. It works. It works. Why wouldn't it work? Well, it does work also for school library advocacy. To do a first-person singular, okay, these line up really nicely. What activates voters and what activates advocates is pretty much the same stuff. The culture, tradition, and habit of voting, or your prior success as an advocate, okay, great. Let's make it possible for you to have access to the polls or access to the tools, and let's thank you for it. And, hi, I'm John, I'm running for. Hi, I'm John, I'm with the organization or issue cause. Hi, I'm your school librarian, let me tell you about my kids. Hi, I'm your school librarian, let me tell you about your kids. We have a thesis at every library when we're doing politics, and this goes for school board actions or city council and county government actions or direct voter engagement at zip code levels, all the way up to across the country. The librarian is the candidate in the race. And that's because people look at the passionate librarian, and that's because people are believers in the library and in the librarians. The people have questions that want to be answered by the librarian, not just as some abstract library. The idea of the candidacy might be uncomfortable, but it's a key way that people listen to you, because if you're asking them for something, you are looking to be, in some way, shape, or form, voted on, ratified. If you have a legitimate ask, well, it's not the same as running for office, but if you have a legitimate ask, it is. Why should I put my emotional, why should I put my civic, why should I put my limited time and attention on you? Oh, you actually have a vision, like a candidate does. You actually have a mission that you're trying to accomplish, like a candidate does. You actually are doing something that's bigger than just your job, that affects those lives. And our thesis at every library is that the library itself is the incumbent in the race, and I mean that very seriously. There's always an incumbent in the race. The incumbent, though, well, do you want to run as the incumbent, or do you want to run against the incumbency? There's an early decision that you need to make, and people listen to the incumbent in a different way than they listen to a challenger. They listen to the incumbent say, well, re-elect me, I will continue to take care of you, and they either agree or disagree that they've been taken care of. They listen to the challenger in the race and say, either unelect that person, elect me, I will take care of you, and believe them or not. But the incumbent in a library funding conversation, a school library programmatic funding conversation, even if you're just bumping up against the principal or the superintendent, is new money is going to extend my success. New money is going to extend our success. Or new money is going to fix problems. There's no two ways, there's only one way to listen, and that's to the truth of the matter. The people that you're talking to about your funding future want to listen to you authentically represent yourself as either the incumbent or the challenger to the problem. New money extends our success. New money fixes problems. All right. How do voters relate to candidates? A little bit of poli-sci 101 time here. There's a lot of stuff on these slides, and you can hit pause. You can take a screenshot later. Basically, it comes down to, does the candidate share the values that matter most to me as a voter? Do they care about people like me? Policy issues, unfortunately, and I'm kind of a policy wonk, to the State of the Union tomorrow night. Values. What are they going to take care of me? Do they care about the things I care about? Do they care about things I care about? If the librarian is the candidate, And let me just boil it all down to sugar on this screen for you. If a librarian is the candidate, and you're either going to run as the incumbent, please, new money extends success, or run against yourself, new money fixes problems for the school library. How do candidates talk? And I want to take a second here, and this isn't spurious. This isn't like how to be like Amazon in some library, teaching webinar series. This is this is the basics. Like, why do people write the book? Why do they write the book as a candidate? Well, it gives them an opportunity to do one big thing, which is to talk about what they believe. What they, in this case, believe about America. It gives them one big opportunity, tactically, is to go out and talk to people about what they believe. You can go on the book speaking tour. You can go on the stump speech circuit. You can go and meet the press. You can go on C-SPAN. The chance to be able to have a conversation that's rooted in what do I believe, and here's some policy recommendations as well. But on the public library side, I was on the library board of trustees for my local library for 8 years. I was board president for 6 years. We wrote 2 strategic plans during that 8-year period. If we had named it Dreams for My Hometown Public Library, it would have been correct. We didn't. If we had named it It Takes a Village with the public library at the center of it, it would have been correct. The strategic plan book, you've got it already with your district, probably. You might have it with your school, but the title of it's wrong. What's in it is true. It is a promise to your students, a covenant with your families, a hope for the community, this generation and the next. And driving your services into that milieu, well, it'll only get you so far because nobody reads the strategic plan. It's never taken out in the stump speech. It never goes on Meet the Press. It never goes on the book speaking circuit. You could have a strategic advantage because people, well, let me go back a slide. People read these things, or they don't, and you know that you shouldn't be running because you got no sales. You're an author of that strategic plan within your district, whether you've been allowed to participate with it or not. You're an independent blogger about it. You are an author. You have agency here, folks. I would like to suggest that people want to read your book about the school library program as a school librarian wants to write it. I got 6 questions for you. My apologies. I got 6 questions for you. Again, you can hit pause. You can take a screenshot. The slides will be up on the ISTE website and the EverLibrary SlideShare. I want to know from you what your authorship is of that mission, vision, and values for your district as expressed through the library, as expressed even when it's properly funded. I want to ask you these questions because this lines up pretty clearly with how values, vision, and mission are talked about. But it has a first-person singular or a first-person plural. Why are you a librarian? Well, I'm a librarian and an educator because. Well, what are your personal values about education? Well, my personal values about education are. The answers are all first-person singular or our values about. I ask you these questions in particular because it lets you break through to the believers. It lets you talk to the believers in a way that their belief system gets activated. And it lets you start answering questions amongst the questioners that have never been vocalized because it also talks about fundamentally why you care and why they also care about the same people and the same populations. Why are you a librarian and an educator? Well, great. Let's start talking to other educators and administrators inside the educational ecosystem about what your commonalities are, as opposed to a feeling of scarcity about the budget. What are your personal values about education? That lets you talk to stakeholders in the community who also care about education first and foremost. What are your values about librarianship? There are people who you actually get a follow-up question from at a cocktail party. Oh, you're a school librarian? That's interesting. And they keep moving on. That's not who I'm talking about. Oh, that's really interesting. I had a school librarian in my life. Who? Oh, what's it like right now in the school? Oh, I heard that things are going good. I heard that things are going bad. Let's talk about librarianship. The believers want to believe in you. The questioners want to hear from you and not just about that largest classroom in the school. Who else cares is the trope I come back to whenever we're working strategically with a school library community at a school or district level. Who else cares is how we start addressing the crises, because that's the first people we've got to talk to, because they are automatically knowing, well, not necessarily automatic in this day and age, they can connect dots about what the librarian does in the school, with the largest classroom, with the right kind of collection, properly staffed, should be doing. We work, though, in places of opportunity to have a conversation around coalition building with folks who want to listen to us in a way that is about not our issues necessarily, but about our common points of reference. Coalitions are built, generally speaking, on one of two principles: common cause or common concern. And let me unwind that for a second. Common cause is something like college and career readiness. Common cause is something like a viable workforce, or a livable community, or a school district that supports property values and a livable community. Common concern is usually for a population. It might be a subpopulation, it might be a small group, it might be one kid, it might be the all y'all of the whole life of the child. Who else cares? Who else is concerned? Who else does a similar job? Is the inventory. I ask these questions not just from a tactical perspective, because I would like to get a list put together with you of who else does care, especially in the face of crises, because you want to get to them first, but better in the face of opportunity, about the funding formula for your school library, because how they're going to listen to your funding request, it's going to have to be about where your point of commonality is. If it's a common concern about career readiness or college readiness, let's talk about that. Your fundability in relation to that, as opposed to who else cares, number 5, about a small population of students. We have to anticipate how they are going to listen to us, not based on what we do, but based on what they care about, that we already also do. The great burden of librarianship, and I'm not a librarian, by the way. I don't have a degree. I don't have an MLS. I've never gone to an NCATE accredited institution. I've never worked in a school library, let alone a public library. I've come at this from a citizen's perspective. The great burden of librarianship is that you do something for everybody with no resources. This is an easy map to make because they are only looking to listen to you first and foremost based on what their interests are. It's not a slight against them. I'm like this myself. Come at me with a new piece of information, it better map to something I already care about. I don't have to get in the dinghy and go out and save the whales myself. I can hear about it from somebody who already does. I might be a believer about what you're talking about already, but there's only 37% of me around library issues. There's only 21%, if we go back to that earlier slide in our heads about who's going to strongly support a school library tax. In the main, our conversations are with people who are like, what do you got? Okay, where's my money going? And who's spending my money? Okay, if the who else cares conversation is where we map, I gotta say, folks, there's a lot of places to start right inside the building, though. Right in the immediate support services area, right in the next ring out from your state organizations for school librarians, from your national ISTE community. This definition here is where, with the ESSA changes I talked about at the beginning in 2016, it still stands. It's part of the federal law. Specialized instructional support personnel is where you all live. There's a giant list of other people who care that if we don't start talking to in a way they are going to listen, well, the crisis, you know what that's like. But the opportunity to put a limited amount of new money to work as leverage across the school, interdepartmental, across many different schools in a big district, across just that one school with the largest classroom that you teach in. I'm not even talking about getting a bit out bigger into the community at this point. I just want the other stakeholders to understand the overlap point and the common cause that you're engaged in with them and a common concern that you have for populations. All right, I want to remind you, this is not the chat box time. I should have amended this slide better. I want to remind you that we're going to be coming around to questions in just a few moments on Twitter. It's with the hashtag ISTELib, ISTELIB. Hit us up at every library, at ISTELib. All right, a couple more things, and then we'll get around to that. Alyssa, I got about 5 minutes here. How do we talk about our funding? I want to just get into the weeds on this. Again, it's helping people listen to you as opposed to telling better stories. Believers believe. Okay, great. Let's tell a story about belief that's based in their belief. Let's update their nostalgia. Let's validate the role of librarian again. Let's renew that covenant that we have with our kids in our classrooms, or in our largest classrooms. Questioners will listen to answers. Yes, like that's true. Questioners will listen. They won't vocalize the question. It's a little frustrating, I'll give you that. But to make a good guess about what else do they care about, who else do they care about? And there is that 26% I said earlier I don't really care about. Well, I kind of do, because I would like them to see that not any old tax is a bad tax, that when we're talking about funding for the school library, it's maximum leverage. They want to listen to stories about leverage that comes from their limited amount of tax money. They want to hear how something goes good for a change for more than one sector. These are people who are tired of hearing stories where there was waste, fraud, and corruption, absolutely. And they're interested in hearing places where there's been some sort of a solution provided that's interdepartmental, interdisciplinary, and hits more than one population. They want to listen to those ideas that you've got. They want to hear about how your funding could go differently than every other boondoggle that's happened. And people listen about school in a way that's maybe not necessarily how we always talk about it right. According to again, this is from the Phi Delta Kappa 2016 40th Annual Survey of Americans and how they believe about school taxes. If less than a majority of your voters believe that the role of education is to prepare students academically, why are you only telling that story? Okay, let me just shift over to the person sitting, in another state, another place. If only 26% of your taxpayer base is a believer that education is supposed to prepare students for work, why are you only talking about STEM? There's a big gap sometimes in our willingness to talk to people where they're at. We want to drive our own narrative. To approach the people we're talking to humbly, with the idea that they are going to be active listeners. The believers want to have their nostalgia updated. The questioners want to have their questions answered. Telling more stories than the one that you're used to telling. I want to use the President Obama example. He was quite good at this. Whether you loved him or not, when President Obama talked about hope and change, he talked about hope and change. He said hope and change about 500 million times in both campaigns, hope and change, hope and change. He was tired of it. His staff was tired of it. Everybody was tired of it. And he never said it enough. But every time he said it in a way that was relevant to the person he was talking to. He respected his listeners. If it was in Iowa, he talked about hope and change in terms of agricultural policy. If he was in Detroit, he talked about hope and change in terms of the automotive industry. To go back a slide, we have to be prepared to tell our stories in a way that the listener wants to listen to. The believers want to believe. The questioners want their answers. And the anti-tax people that really tax suspicious and averse actually want to hear stories about leverage. Keep it relevant to them as opposed to what you're trying to drive, because you have the librarian curse. You're already doing something for everybody. There's some conventional wisdom that I just want to break. I just want to break it. People respond to stories more than statistics, blah, blah, blah. No, people respond to emotions and to hearing their resonant values fed back to them. It doesn't matter if it's a statistic. It doesn't matter if it's the earned run average of the Cubs, God help us. What did the player feel like? What did the player do? What did the team do to dig in? What's the I and the we of it in the post-game interview? People respond to emotions. Most advocacy stories are somebody else's anecdotes. Please tell your own story. If I'm going to read one slide the entire time that we're together tonight, it's this one. Tell your own story, not just the stories of the kids you're helping, not just the stories of the families that you're helping succeed, not just the story of the community that you're so embedded in. Tell your own first-person singular story. It's really hard for humans, us, people like you and me, to talk about statistics and inputs and outputs. We're really good at listening to outcomes. The listener wants to hear about what you're going to do different with all these different features if your funding formula changes. And they want to hear about what's going to be left behind, what the negative is, what the shortfall on outcomes could be if these features are not. The district's mission, vision, and values matter a great deal, but your professional and personal values about your work matter a great deal, because that's how people are listening to who is spending their money, not just where their money is going. What are they expecting and hope for outcomes if things funded? On the public library side, we always talk about Plan A and Plan B. Plan A is very simple. It's your strategic plan, your building plan, your collections plan. What happens if it passes? What happens to people if it passes? And what's Plan B? What happens to people if it doesn't pass? Because there's one thing on the ballot, but one of two things happens. It's either going to be passed or it's going to fail on election day. We want to be able to talk about the negative. You need to talk about the negative. It's not sour grapes. It's not you violating the librarian's creed of doing more with less. It's the truth. It's really hard for humans to care about these statistics. How do we put it in a way that's about our value system? The shared value system we have. Well, the believers want to have their value system activated. This can do it for them. It's lives touched. It's solving problems. It's that list of values, vision, and mission I asked you for before. The questioners want to know the practical side of it, of course, but they want to hear about what would be different if it didn't happen and you weren't there to do it. Alyssa, what have people been tweeting about tonight?
So we haven't seen too many tweets, but that's okay because I know that there's people watching it. But I do want to go back and actually just make a point or two.
Yeah.
One, I'm going to tell my personal story with you guys for a second so that people understand how helpful every library has been.
That's so awesome of you. I'm going to jump back to the screen, okay?
Yes. We lost librarians in my hometown of South Orange and Maplewood, New Jersey, and I became an advocate for bringing them back. And it's really funny because I tweeted out at one point, oh my God, when, like the educational advocacy, like how you become one, I was like, that's my, that's my slide. That's how I became that person. I couldn't sit quietly by and allow it to happen. And every library did a lot to help me out. You guys were incredible to help out. You came right in. You have this great platform that sends emails out quickly, petitions people. It clogged the mailboxes, the inboxes of everybody in the district and board members so that we broke their email system, which was awesome.
The internet, that's great.
And it was so helpful to have that. And tonight was a great start to this as to learning how to tell your story and how to advocate for it. Because that's so important to learning how to tell your story. Briefly, I'm going to tell the people about one story that happened to me that I was asked to do a Ignite session. And in that Ignite session, I was told to tell my story of like, how did I change and become something different? And I talked about how I was the shushing librarian and I went to being a different librarian who was very interactive with the kids and all of that. And I told the story about one of my students who loved to do stacking of cups. But as a librarian, we don't have a lot of money. And so we always bring in all our stuff. So he wanted different color cups. Like he was so excited, but he's like, I don't want just the red Solo cups, you know, from Costco, because that's what I had and that's what's cheap to buy. He's like, I want different colored cups. And so I tell this story and I have the picture of him up about it. Well, what do you know happens? A guy who was in the audience, who was a CEO of a company, heard my speech, was so taken about the picture of my child and the fact that he wanted multicolor cups. What happens? I get home to my house and there is a box from Amazon filled with multicolored Solo cups that we now use all the time in our library and that Javen loves. And that's because I just told this personal story about this kid. I wasn't looking to get more Solo cups, but it you know, it is being used so much and has brought so much joy to my students because I told a personal story. So I want people to realize that that is very, very important in the process.
That's real cool. So I pulled up the ISTE Lib Twitter feed, and Mary Clark.
Good.
No, she just gave us a big honor. She said, "I'm not tweeting about ISTE Lib because I'm furiously taking notes." I'll take that, Mary. Thank you.
That's even better. But guys, don't have to fiercely take notes. Like, I love that you're fiercely taking notes, Mary, but it's okay because this is archived. You guys can everybody can get any of this. It's going to be there on our website, the ISTE Librarian Network website. From now on, it is yours to go back and look at, because I know that there are slides that I want to go back and look at when I'm doing things with advocacy from now on, because they were so good. But, you know, we're going to have this out there and available to you guys always. And it's always free because we believe in that. And we believe in making it free for everybody to view at all times. We also do have a webinar coming up, and I think John's going to go to that slide now.
Yeah, so real quick, a few more things we're just in the denouement here, Alyssa. SaveSchoolLibrarians.org. Save School Librarians. It's not Save School Libraries, folks. It's Save School Librarians on purpose. I want to talk about the positions that are under threat around the country. We want to do school and district level advocacy, as well as state level activities that support the funding formula for libraries. I want to thank Follett for their support of our activities. They've made it possible for us to do this site this year. And we've done some good work. Everything that Alyssa talked about, we ran through action.everylibrary.org and then Save School Librarians as well.
Yeah.
At Every Library, we're doing the Million Americans for Libraries. I know some of you have problems getting on Facebook and social media during the school day. That's cool. Hit us up afterwards. Like the page. You can observe about a lot of what we're doing at Every Library through our Facebook page. Of course, go to the ISTE Librarians Network Hub. This is a big place. This is a big resource here, and this is a wonderful partnership, Alyssa. And I'm glad that we were able to do this first session together. Our next one is in April 26th. You can go to SaveSchoolLibrarians.org and set up your RSVP for it. We'll remind you day of. What else am I forgetting? Are we cool?
Yeah, this one I'm really excited about. Go back one slide if you can for me. I'm really excited about this one because I think it's so important, which is fighting back when cuts are threatened. This is a huge one, and this is one that I get requested about to manage to save Columbia High School and South Orange Maplewoods librarians. Is like, how do you do this? This is a great webinar for people, and it's perfect, especially because it's coming around that time. April is like, March and April is when cuts happen, so it's very important.
That's right. I'm going to leave this up for 2 more seconds so people can take a screenshot later. And in the meantime, let me stop sharing.
No, thank you, John.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
This has been such a great night and so informative, and I cannot thank you enough. And Mary's like, you know, I learned so much. Oh, she said that's how she got her chest set was from Instagram pictures. Because remember, we were just talking about pictures.
Oh, yeah.
That's how she got her chest set. So that's sort of awesome. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing you in April. Please, you know, RSVP, just get your information to them. But everything is on our website. So we'll see you in April. Thanks again, John.
Wait, take care. Cheers.
Stop our broadcast now and